watch necropsies done in the field, and it's like watching somebody disassemble a car engine, but they do it in a life form, a cow, and they do it very neatly, piece by piece by piece, looking for all kinds of anomalies. And he said, when that veterinarian showed him there was no heart, the pericardium was there, no cut, no blood, and no excision, the veterinarian said to Sheriff Tex Graves, "Don't call me out on another one of these. I refuse to stand in front of the media and say, I have no idea how this was done and this is impossible." Now that gives you a behind the scenes of many, many variations on what has happened between veterinarians doing necropsies for real behind the scenes, while law enforcement would say to the local media, it's predator, disease, or satanic cult, knowing that was a lie.
All right, you've absolutely convinced me, although I was already, that it's not humans that have done this. It's non-human entities that have done it. Again, the question, why? In other words, what are they trying to discern by doing this?
Well, this begins to move into a very difficult and complex and sensitive subject about genetic harvest from this planet, probably for millennia, in order to produce genetically manipulated containers that could be standing up Homo erectus primates, Neanderthals, Homo sapiens sapien, our current model, plus every conceivable kind of every other container that you've ever heard of, from centaurs to unicorns. In experimentations on this planet, in this solar system, that has a particular gravity, a particular atmosphere, a lot of water. And when it comes to the why, it's even more difficult. And so I'm going to flesh out a little bit about this whole issue of a technology that can take genetic harvesting from whatever the entity or creature is, and then turn it into something else that is usable to the non-humans. In my, I've done 4 books. 3 are big, 8.5 by 11, 400 some pages each. And I did that so that I could put big photographs, big documents, everything clear in these books.
Right.
And in my 3rd book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, High Strangeness, there is one entire section about what some abductees have referred to as resurrection technology. And one of the most dramatic in this whole, it's a big chapter, many people that have had this interaction with this technology. And one of the most dramatic was a woman named in the book, Linda Porter. And I drove from Los Angeles up to an area in Porterville, California to meet with her back when I began working on this book. Between 1994 is when Glimpses Volume 1 came out, about animal mutilations, crop circles, human abductions, and a taxonomy that I did from the illustrations that people had done over 30 years. And then by 1998, Glimpses Volume 2 came out. So I was working on all of this between 1992, 93, and that's when I went to see Linda Porter. And she had sent me the clearest, she was an artist to begin with, a series of drawings about what had happened to her between her teenage years and about her 20s. And it included having a beam of light. Many people remember a beam of light. They don't exactly remember what happened, but she remembered a beam of light. And then as a young teenager, she was inside of some kind of a craft or a round room. And what happens, in very summarized for the radio broadcast tonight, is that a praying mantis looking creature, 8 foot tall, which does come up in lots of abductions, even if you don't hear about it much, appears, and at first she was terrified, and the tall praying mantis put into her mind a sense of deep sadness about her and all humans, and it was accompanied by a sense that this praying mantis was so ancient that it could be as old as our solar system, as incomprehensible as that is, and that these praying mantis are programmed to monitor the evolution of life in entire solar systems. We're getting into the world of Michio Kaku's theorizing about very advanced civilizations having this ability.
Yes.
And that when humans are in the presence of the praying mantis has the ability to calm the human's natural fear of the way they look. And what he did next, he took the young teenage Linda Porter to a round, small container, almost like a small room, and showed her all of this dense, yellow, sparkly light inside of it. And then, as he's saying, this is one piece of what you need to understand, he walked her into a room nearby and said, watch. And now it's a gray type entity. We can get into the distinctions of gray androids that are robots and prime intelligence grays, and that there are all kinds. And now what she's seeing is what I would call more the prime intelligence in the gray category. They have vertical snake eyes, they have gray pebbly skin, usually looks slightly reptilian, and they are quite different from the 3 foot tall, we'll call them androids, that have the big black eyes and the pear-shaped heads and the little bodies. There's a big difference. So now she's in the presence of what appears to be a prime intelligence gray, who walks over to a bed-like apparatus upon which there is lying a male human, and the gray reaches down, and Linda even asked me, could this be possible? Are they doing this in front of me like a hologram? Because this is what occurs. The gray's long 4 fingers just seem to pass through the man's chest. And out of the man's chest, the gray being comes up holding the man's heart and shows it, no blood, totally dry, shows it to Linda Porter, and she gets telepathic thoughts like this. It is important that the entity, and she gets the symbol or gets communication that when they say entity, they are meaning soul, spirit, the animus of life. That the man's entity and this particular container of the man's body, it's important that the soul remain inside of such a container for a longer period of time than the man's body is willing to give, because the man is dying of heart disease. And the gray communicates that they are letting this version of the man die, but over in a tube. And when there's a gesture, now she sees that there are these tubes that have various people in them, and one she recognizes in the tube, that has light above and light below, is a man who looks a little bit younger than the man on the table. And the gray being communicates telepathically to her, because it is important for the soul spirit, but he uses the word entity, to stay inside of this type of container. We are going to revivify him in this cloned body, in this tube that we can preserve and control. And we are going to put him in Australia, and in his home in the United States, he will die. So the non-humans, right, are showing a teenager that they have the ability to allow a container to die while they simultaneously are resurrecting a cloned, preserved body, because there is something extremely important, the study about the soul-spirit interaction with Homo sapiens sapiens. This is very complex, and we can keep going in this.
Oh, no, by all means. So they're studying that soul. That is a how would you put it? I guess he was a case study, and for some reason they needed that soul to continue.
Well, what if because I don't think they're studying just one thing. I think this is a huge, complex, 16-layered chess game that's going on concerning various agendas by various non-humans, and the non-humans themselves may not always get along about this political question. What is allowable to do with life? If Homo sapiens sapien is the product of genetic manipulation in already evolving primates going back to Homo erectus, as the alleged presidential briefing paper that I was shown at Kirtland Air Force Base on April 9, 1983 said, it says that in there, then we must have been made the way we are, with our tendency toward violence and self-destruction and all the things that humans are, for some reason. And there have been so many wars on this planet in arguments about whose God is superior to another. And all these wars have produced the death of containers. Now, if you step back a little bit lighter and you go back to a discussion that I had back in the early 1980s when I was still working on animal mutilations with a man that I later learned his paycheck came from the Central Intelligence Agency, but to the outside world, he would have been a military person. And he told me that he had been exposed to the whole concept of Truman and the Majestic 12, and that he had had some assignments in the military having to do with non-humans in which our government was trying to do rudimentary communication with some type of the Greys, that they had found that the very tall blondes and the tall red-haired types wouldn't communicate, and that there was this other group that, here's another thing that no one wants to be true. People will say the idea of standing up lizards or standing up alligators, it's so repugnant, and they won't go there, even though abductees say this is another type present in all of this. I always ask people who say that's not possible, that's somebody making up a science fiction story. Our own biblical history has a Garden of Eden in which Adam and Eve are there, allegedly as first human form.
Right.
And what is there also? A very intelligent serpent that communicates with Eve all about things like getting out of the garden and learning about technology, science, life, and all of these things that are called the temptation of Eve and the dropping of the innocence of the first prime Homo sapien. Well, who is that serpent in the Garden of Eden for real? And what is the relationship between the historic reptilian undercurrent in so much religious literature and the gray beings, the prime intelligence with the snake-like eyes, and the tall, blonde, and red-haired humanoids that can have either crystal blue eyes or the blondes have been seen with very gold eyes like the Greeks. And a lot of people don't realize that the Greeks on this planet are the only ones in bloodlines that have very yellow gold eyes. Some of them. I have a cousin who's Greek and she has yellow gold eyes. And that there are all kinds of contradictions and confusions in our own religious and earth history, that when you come to these stories that I've run into and have published in Glimpses of Other Realities about people being shown by beings, mixtures of beings, that their body and the relationship of the container to the soul spirit has some very profound meaning to these non-humans, and they are trying to study it. And one day, in discussing all of this with a colleague, somebody suggested that I study the Gnostics, going back to Zoroaster and Zoroastrianism. And the interesting thing is, when you go back to that over 2,000 years old literature, you run into a, well, let's just call it a big box view of the cosmos and how this universe is working, that has to do with the recycling of souls in a reincarnated process that is the machinery of the universe, in which the soul spirit, the animus, in each life goes in and out of different containers, sort of like one metaphor was, think of a sewing machine and the way the needle goes in and out of stitches. That any soul spirit could have that many stitches up and down, in and out of bodies. And we have been told historically in the current age, reincarnation has been set off to the side as possible mythology. The idea of tall reptilian humanoids have been set off into the realm of science fiction. That the idea of a serpent having something to do with the beginning of humans is set as mythology. These are all the words that put an insulation between what might have been historically extraterrestrial biological entity terraforming, and that's the word, terraforming and manipulating genetic material on the surface of this planet. And now I'm going to give you a number art that was given to me in 1999 by a man who had retired from the Defense Intelligence Agency. And
Okay, Linda, can you hold tight for a moment? We've got to do a break.
Art, that is true. I wrote about this in